What if the ancient Druids, often romanticized as wise guardians of nature, hid practices so disturbing that even their own tribes whispered about them only in fear? What if the spiritual leaders who shaped Celtic belief were also the keepers of rituals that crossed every moral boundary, operating in forests where no outsider was allowed to step? This opening question forces us to reconsider everything we think we know about these enigmatic figures, because behind the peaceful image of sacred groves and whispered chants existed a shadowed world governed by secrecy, power, and intimidation. And once you step inside that world, it becomes impossible to see the Druids the same way again. For centuries, stories about these spiritual authorities were filtered through poetry, myth, and the interpretations of foreign chroniclers. But hidden beneath the poetic symbolism lay ceremonies designed to test fear, loyalty, and obedience in ways that shaped entire clans. Imagine being led into a torchlit clearing, where the air vibrated with chants meant not to heal, but to bind. Imagine standing before figures cloaked in animal skins, their faces marked with ash, performing rites said to protect the tribe, but that demanded absolute submission. These were not mere rituals. They were psychological tools that forged power through awe and terror, tools no one dared question. The Druids mastered the art of playing with the unseen. They invoked spirits, predicted omens, and declared the will of forces no ordinary person could challenge. And this authority extended far beyond simple guidance. Their hidden practices created a system in which mystery meant control, and the line between spiritual duty and manipulation blurred in ways that left lasting scars on those who lived under their influence. The deeper we investigate these disturbing customs, the more we uncover a world built on fear disguised as divine necessity. Has anyone ever told you the darker side of these rituals? You may find that what you discover here shifts not only your understanding of the Druids, but your entire perception of ancient religious power. What you are about to uncover might feel unsettling, but it is crucial to understanding the true nature of spiritual authority in one of history's most mysterious cultures. Before we move deeper into these hidden practices, share your thoughts. Have you ever imagined the Druidic world this way? Leave a comment telling me what surprised you so far. Make sure to like this video and check if you are already subscribed, because what comes next may reveal even more shocking truths, leading us further into the shadowed heart of these ancient rituals. To understand how the most disturbing Druidic practices emerged, we need to step inside the structure that allowed such secrecy to flourish. The Druids were not simply religious figures, they were architects of an internal hierarchy that operated beyond the reach of tribal chiefs and warriors. Their authority came from knowledge withheld, rituals concealed, and a complex system of initiation that separated the chosen from the ordinary. These hidden layers of power shaped every aspect of Celtic spiritual life, creating an environment where practices kept in shadow could be justified as sacred necessity. Young initiates were not merely taught chants or herbal lore. They underwent years of isolation, observation, and symbolic trials designed to erase individual identity and rebuild it. According to Druidic expectations, the forest was their classroom, but it was also a crucible. Nights spent in silence trained them to hear meaning in every rustle of leaves, every shift of wind. Tasks that bordered on psychological breaking points taught them that obedience was not a request, but a foundation of spiritual truth. By the time an initiate ascended, he no longer belonged fully to his clan. He belonged to the order. This carefully constructed system allowed the higher ranks to operate without interference. Only those deemed worthy could ascend the chain of knowledge, and each new level required deeper immersion into practices outsiders would never hear about. The structure became a fortress of silence, where information flowed downward only when the upper circle allowed it. This secrecy was portrayed as protection, but it also ensured that no one could question the motives behind certain rituals or the extent of power wielded in the name of sacred duty. Within this hidden framework, the Druids created rituals meant not just to connect with the spiritual world, but to reinforce their own authority. Ceremonies were crafted in layers, with an outer version shown to the community and an inner version reserved for the initiated. The duality served a purpose. To the tribe, the Druids appeared as wise guides. To those inside, the truth was far more complex, shaped by hierarchical expectations and bound by oaths that forbade disclosure. Even the most loyal followers understood that crossing certain lines meant becoming the subject of harsh spiritual reprimands, delivered without explanation. This system of secrecy also influenced how Druidic law was enforced. Decisions were often communicated as divine revelations, leaving no space for debate. The common people might witness a ritual of blessing, unaware that deeper, darker traditions existed behind the scenes, traditions meant to secure obedience through fear, cloaked as sacred authority. Over centuries, these structures allowed hidden practices to evolve unchecked, passed down through generations of spiritual leaders who believed control was essential to maintaining cosmic balance. And so, beneath the peaceful imagery often associated with Celtic spirituality, a far more intricate and shadowed system operated quietly, shaping not only belief but behavior. The deeper one looks into this hierarchical world, the more it becomes clear that these structures were not accidental. They were carefully designed to preserve rituals that outsiders would never be allowed to question or even witness, creating a foundation that supported practices far more unsettling than the legends suggest, guiding us toward the next layer of this ancient and concealed world. The next layer of Druidic power involved the secretive rituals that tested both body and mind, often in ways that tribal members could not comprehend. These were ceremonies designed to enforce absolute discipline, demanding obedience that went beyond ordinary social expectations. The participants were pushed to extremes, sometimes enduring days of fasting, exposure to harsh weather, or silence so complete it distorted perception. Every challenge was framed as a spiritual exercise, yet the underlying objective was unmistakably clear: control through fear, awe, and psychological pressure. The Druids used these methods to identify weaknesses, measure loyalty, and cultivate a new type of devotion that made questioning authority almost impossible. A young initiate might be placed alone in a sacred grove with nothing but a fire and the knowledge that unseen eyes watched constantly. Every sound, every movement became a signal, a test of focus and restraint. Those who faltered were reminded, through subtle, often symbolic punishment, that the line between spiritual purity and failure was thin and unforgiving. The lessons were brutal, and the effects long-lasting, shaping minds to align with the vision of the order. Sacrificial rites, though less common than the exaggerated tales later suggested, were conducted with precision, combining elements of the natural world, symbolic representations, and carefully orchestrated ceremony. Animals were more often used than humans, but the psychological effect on initiates was profound. The observation of life taken in the name of cosmic balance, presented as essential for the survival of the tribe, ingrained a sense of absolute obedience. In some accounts, these rituals included the use of trance states, chants, and herbal preparations that amplified sensory perception, creating experiences that were simultaneously terrifying and enlightening, cementing the authority of the Druids in the eyes of the participants. Beyond individual trials, these ceremonies reinforced the hierarchical power structure. Higher-ranking Druids, fully initiated into the deepest secrets, would oversee rituals with meticulous attention, ensuring that the lessons of control, secrecy, and obedience were communicated implicitly. Those lower in rank or new to the order would witness acts whose purpose was partially hidden, unable to grasp the full significance, yet profoundly aware that failure to conform could result in spiritual or social consequences that extended far beyond the ritual site. In these hidden practices, the line between spiritual guidance and manipulation was blurred. The outward appearance, chants, ceremonial attire, sacred groves, masked the ideal reality. These rituals were as much about consolidating authority and power as they were about connecting with the divine. The young, impressionable, and ambitious were molded into individuals whose worldview was inseparable from the Druidic order's design. Compliance became instinctive. Questioning became unthinkable. This layer of secrecy and psychological influence ensured that even when outsiders looked upon the Druids with admiration, the full extent of their control remained invisible. By embedding control into every ceremony, the Druids created a system where devotion, fear, and reverence intertwined seamlessly. Every ritual reinforced the idea that spiritual law was supreme, that breaking it, even unknowingly, could have devastating consequences. And in doing so, they crafted a legacy that would outlast any single generation, ensuring that the darker, hidden practices persisted under the guise of wisdom, guiding the next topic toward the profound depths of Druidic punishment and secret trials that shaped the Celtic world. As the hierarchy of the Druids became more entrenched, so did the methods they employed to maintain control over both initiates and community leaders. The most disturbing of these were the punishments, often conducted under the cover of darkness in sacred groves, designed not merely to correct behavior, but to instill a profound psychological impact. Imagine being accused of failing a ritual or breaking an unspoken law, and being led to the center of a forest clearing, where the silence is broken only by the rustling of leaves and the distant howls of wolves. The atmosphere itself was a tool of intimidation, teaching that disobedience carried consequences beyond the visible or immediate. Physical and psychological trials were interwoven, creating experiences that left participants questioning reality. Some endured exposure to extreme elements, submerged in icy waters, or bound under sweltering sun, forced to remain motionless for hours as Druids chanted invocations. Others faced more symbolic punishments. Blindfolded and isolated, the initiate would confront visions orchestrated by the higher-ranking Druids, shadowy figures, masked in ritual attire, delivering cryptic messages that hinted at failure, sin, or impending doom. Each test was designed to break down self-assurance and rebuild obedience, embedding the authority of the Druidic order deeper into the psyche. Yet the most chilling practices were the psychological manipulations of entire communities. Leaders, warriors, and elders were brought into ceremonies where their decisions, loyalty, and courage were scrutinized, often under the guise of spiritual consultation. Failures were not punished arbitrarily. Every punishment was a calculated lesson, ensuring that both the individual and the observer internalized the consequences. Fear became a tool as powerful as faith, and the lessons learned in those forests spread silently through the tribal structure, reinforcing the unspoken dominance of the Druids over every aspect of life. The secrecy surrounding these punishments amplified their power. Accounts, if any existed, were rarely shared outside the inner circle. Initiates could speak only in metaphors, ensuring the practices remained enigmatic yet terrifying. The combination of isolation, sensory manipulation, and ritualized intimidation produced an unparalleled level of influence. Druids could shape decisions, enforce compliance, and even subtly determine the direction of political and military actions, all while maintaining the outward image of spiritual guidance and wisdom. The ordinary villagers saw only ceremonies steeped in tradition, unaware of the psychological machinery at work behind the scenes. These practices left a long-lasting imprint on Celtic society. Even generations later, stories of secret trials, hidden punishments, and mystical commands circulated in hushed tones, often exaggerated into myth. Yet, beneath the myth lay a sophisticated system of control, ensuring that those who survived the ordeals carried the teachings and the fear of the Druids throughout their lives. It was a form of authority rooted not in law or force, but in the mastery of human psychology and the manipulation of belief, making the unseen hand of the Druids far more formidable than any sword or army. As we reflect on these hidden punishments, it becomes evident that the true power of the Druids lay in their ability to dominate perception and enforce obedience through invisible means. Their control was subtle, pervasive, and terrifyingly effective, ensuring that secrets remained unbroken and influence unchallenged. Now, I want to hear from you. Which of these secretive practices shocked you the most? Leave your thoughts and reflections in the comments below. Share your perspective on how fear and faith intertwined, and let us explore together the hidden world that history often refuses to reveal. Beyond the forested clearings and hidden groves, the Druids extended their influence into the most sacred spaces of Celtic life, conducting secret trials and spiritual ceremonies that shaped the fate of entire communities. These rituals were cloaked in symbolism, often invoking the unseen forces of the natural and supernatural world, and yet their impact was concrete and undeniable. Leaders, warriors, and ordinary tribe members alike were bound to the authority of the Druids, subjected to judgments that claimed the backing of the cosmos itself. Every decision, from the distribution of resources to the choice of who led a hunting party, was subtly affected by these shadowed practices, ensuring that power remained concentrated in the hands of those who understood the deepest secrets. The initiation into these trials was rigorous and often harrowing. Apprentices and acolytes underwent lengthy periods of observation, memorizing chants, learning herb lore, and witnessing ceremonies whose purpose was deliberately obscured. The process ensured not only technical skill, but psychological resilience, forging individuals who could carry the weight of secrecy while enforcing the hierarchical order. The rites were calculated to instill awe, obedience, and the constant awareness that even minor errors could have profound consequences. The outer world saw only the tranquility of sacred groves and ceremonial fires, but the inner workings revealed a network of influence and intimidation unparalleled in any other ancient society. Some rituals required initiates to confront the boundary between life and death, engaging in acts designed to test endurance, courage, and spiritual alignment. Simulated sacrifices, nocturnal vigils, and symbolic acts of submission were all part of this hidden curriculum. Participants were trained to navigate fear, uncertainty, and moral ambiguity, internalizing the notion that the Druidic code superseded conventional morality. These practices were not random. They were designed to cultivate leaders who would remain loyal, capable of enforcing authority, and wholly devoted to the spiritual and political objectives of the order. Moreover, the Druids' influence extended into the manipulation of perception and memory. Participants were taught to interpret omens, dreams, and natural phenomena in ways that reinforced obedience to the order, often embedding psychological conditioning within layers of ritual. Leaders were subtly guided to make decisions in alignment with Druidic priorities, while ordinary members came to associate divine sanction with the directives issued by the initiated. In this way, the control exercised by the Druids permeated every aspect of life, invisible yet total, shaping the social, spiritual, and political landscape of Celtic communities for generations. This intricate system of hidden trials, symbolic punishments, and subtle coercion ensured that the Druidic order maintained authority without overt violence. It created a society in which the spiritual elite could enforce compliance, guide decision-making, and perpetuate secrecy, all while preserving the outward appearance of divine guidance and sacred tradition. The legacy of these practices, though often obscured by mythology and folklore, hints at a culture in which unseen hands wielded extraordinary power and where obedience was cultivated as an art form, quietly shaping the destiny of entire tribes and embedding the influence of the Druids into every layer of Celtic life. The depth of Druidic influence extended far beyond ritualized trials and punishments, reaching into the very fabric of spiritual manipulation that governed Celtic life. Their mastery over perception allowed them to shape beliefs and behaviors, turning fear, awe, and devotion into tools of control. These spiritual authorities understood that power did not need to be overt to be absolute. By embedding subtle psychological pressure within rituals, symbols, and omens, they could command obedience, dictate social norms, and influence decision-making without ever lifting a hand in violence. The clever interplay of belief and authority transformed the natural world into a stage, where the forest, the river, and the sky became instruments of compliance, reinforcing the notion that the Druids' guidance was not just beneficial, but inevitable. Within this framework, the practice of influence was systematic. Messages and instructions were often communicated indirectly, conveyed through signs, coded language, and symbolic acts that initiated and acolytes interpreted according to strict rules. These layers of understanding created an elite class whose knowledge was impossible to challenge, while the uninitiated remained captivated by the apparent certainty and spiritual weight of Druidic instruction. A Druid's word became law because it was intertwined with the invisible forces of nature, presented as both sacred and unassailable. The ordinary observer could only witness the ritual, sensing its power, without ever comprehending the psychological scaffolding underpinning it. Manipulation extended to the very perception of reality. Druids guided interpretations of omens, celestial events, and natural phenomena, ensuring that the outcomes appeared to validate their authority. For example, the alignment of the sun during solstice ceremonies or the behavior of animals during specific rituals could be presented as divine signs that confirmed the correctness of decisions or the spiritual purity of certain members. The Druidic elite were experts in crafting situations where fear and reverence intertwined seamlessly, leaving those who observed or participated feeling both protected and bound. The emotional weight of such experiences solidified loyalty and internalized obedience, often without participants consciously realizing the extent of their conditioning. This subtle but pervasive influence was reinforced through the repetition of sacred routines, where even minor infractions or failures were met with symbolic repercussions that communicated the consequences of disobedience. Silence, omission, and controlled revelation became essential tools. Participants learned that understanding came in layers and that attempting to seek clarity prematurely could result in isolation or spiritual correction. These practices ensured that the initiates internalized the Druidic worldview, carrying it into the broader tribe, and further amplifying the reach of secret teachings. By mastering psychological guidance and spiritual framing, the Druids maintained a network of control as powerful as any political structure, yet cloaked in sanctity. In essence, the Druids' ability to manipulate belief, fear, and perception was their most potent tool. They wove influence into the spiritual and social tapestry of Celtic communities, creating a system where obedience was cultivated, devotion reinforced, and dissent subtly suppressed. Through these hidden practices, the Druids secured a form of authority that endured across generations, shaping the choices, fears, and faith of entire populations. This mastery of psychological and spiritual control prepared the path for the next exploration into the most secretive and disturbing ceremonies that defined their shadowed power, revealing the lengths to which the Druidic order would go to preserve its dominion. Among the most secretive and unsettling aspects of Druidic practice were the ceremonies conducted on nights deemed sacred or spiritually potent, often corresponding with solstices, equinoxes, or other key points in the Celtic calendar. These rituals were reserved for the initiated, shielded from the wider community, and orchestrated to enforce both reverence and fear. Only those fully embedded within the hierarchy could participate, and even then, the experience demanded complete submission. These hidden ceremonies were not merely symbolic. They were designed to test loyalty, resilience, and the willingness to accept the unseen authority of the order, pushing participants to confront both their personal limits and the unspoken rules that governed the spiritual elite. The ceremonies themselves often involved extended periods of meditation, fasting, or exposure to the natural elements, amplified by chants, smoke, and symbolic objects believed to channel divine forces. Initiates were placed in positions where their perception was challenged, forcing them to navigate the thin line between spiritual enlightenment and psychological stress. The presence of senior Druids overseeing these rites added another layer of intensity. Their silence, gestures, and unyielding attention communicated power without words, ensuring that each participant internalized the hierarchy and the absolute authority of those leading the ritual. In these moments, the forest itself became a stage of dominance, the natural world complicit in reinforcing the boundaries of obedience. What occurred during these nights was often deliberately obscured, leaving participants with fragmented memories that reinforced mystery and awe. Some rites incorporated simulated sacrifices, controlled isolation, or the reenactment of myths in ways that tested comprehension, fear, and obedience. The ambiguity of these rituals heightened their psychological impact, creating an experience in which the line between sacred duty and personal endurance was deliberately blurred. Those who emerged from these nights were transformed, their understanding of loyalty, fear, and devotion reshaped by encounters that seemed supernatural, yet were meticulously crafted by human hands. Every step, every chant, every moment of uncertainty was calculated to reinforce submission and elevate the authority of the Druidic elite. The secrecy surrounding these ceremonies also ensured that knowledge was concentrated, with only the most trusted and capable individuals allowed to carry insights forward. The fear of breach or misinterpretation kept participants compliant, while the perceived power of the rituals extended far beyond those present, shaping belief throughout the broader community. Legends and stories would eventually circulate, exaggerating or misinterpreting the rites, but their true purpose remained obscured, a mechanism of control as effective as it was terrifying. Outsiders could only glimpse the outer performances, unaware of the depth of manipulation occurring beneath the veil of sanctity. These hidden practices served not only to maintain internal discipline, but to solidify the long-term influence of the Druids. They reinforced a worldview in which the spiritual elite dictated the limits of knowledge, power, and obedience, ensuring that their authority remained uncontested and fearfully respected. Now, I want to hear your thoughts. Which of these secretive ceremonies strikes you as the most unsettling? Share your reflections in the IHU comments below, and let us know how you perceive the balance between fear and devotion in these hidden rites. Your insight helps unravel the shadowed legacy of the Druids as we move deeper into their world. Beyond the ritualistic and spiritual manipulation, the Druids' influence extended into the political and military realms of Celtic society, guiding decisions that shaped the course of clans and tribes without revealing their hand. Their knowledge of omens, natural phenomena, and spiritual interpretations was wielded strategically, influencing alliances, war preparations, and the allocation of resources. Leaders relied on Druidic counsel, believing that the decisions were sanctioned by unseen forces and divine insight. In truth, the Druids had created a subtle system of guidance that ensured outcomes aligned with their long-term objectives, often consolidating their power while remaining invisible to public scrutiny. The Druids' ability to shape political decisions stemmed from the aura of inevitability surrounding their practices. Tribes believed that ignoring the guidance of a Druid could invoke the wrath of spirits, the misfortune of the seasons, or the curse of the ancestors. This perception of supernatural consequence made resistance not only socially dangerous, but spiritually threatening. By embedding their advice within layers of symbolic meaning and divine authority, the Druids ensured compliance while simultaneously maintaining the secrecy of their true intentions. Chiefs, warriors, and elected tribal leaders often acted without question, their choices guided by rituals and prophecies whose deeper significance was known only to the inner circle of the order. In the context of warfare, Druids served as both spiritual advisors and psychological strategists. Through carefully interpreted omens, ritualized observation of nature, and symbolic actions, they were able to influence the morale, tactics, and coordination of armies. Their presence instilled a belief that battles were preordained and that alignment with the Druids' instructions was essential for victory. The illusion of divine sanction reinforced obedience, while subtle guidance ensured that the outcome favored the Druidic order's interests. Warriors who doubted the authority of these figures risked both social alienation and a perceived loss of cosmic favor, amplifying the psychological grip of the Druids over military operations. Even mundane decisions, such as resource allocation, territorial disputes, or trade arrangements, were affected by the invisible hand of the Druids. By framing counsel within the language of spiritual necessity and cosmic balance, they extended their control over every aspect of tribal life. Leaders often could not distinguish between genuine divine insight and the carefully engineered influence of the Druidic hierarchy. Over time, this systemic guidance became self-reinforcing. Those who followed the Druids' instructions were rewarded with stability, success, or social recognition, while dissenters were marginalized or accused of defying sacred law. The cumulative effect of this hidden influence was profound. Entire communities operated under a dual reality, one publicly observable, guided by tradition and ceremony, and one covertly manipulated, shaped by the subtle strategic interventions of the Druids. Their capacity to direct wars, influence alliances, and control leaders without overt coercion demonstrates the extraordinary reach of their power. As we examine the next layer of Druidic authority, we will uncover how these spiritual manipulators used their invisible networks to maintain dominance, enforce loyalty, and ensure that their hidden practices continued unchallenged across generations. The Druidic order's control did not stop at individuals or localized tribes. It extended into an intricate web of influence designed to preserve the order's authority across regions and generations. Through a combination of spiritual guidance, selective secrecy, and subtle manipulation, the Druids maintained a network in which knowledge and power were concentrated, ensuring that their hidden practices could continue unchallenged. Even when political power shifted or tribal leaders changed, the unseen hand of the Druids persisted, quietly directing decisions and shaping outcomes according to a long-term vision known only to the inner circle of the order. Central to this influence was the management of information and ritual knowledge. The Druids were meticulous about who could observe, who could participate, and who could inherit critical teachings. Initiates were trained to understand not only the ceremonies themselves, but also the psychological and social effects that each action produced. The secrecy surrounding these practices created a hierarchy of awareness, with the elite able to interpret omens, rituals, and symbols that others could only witness superficially. This asymmetry ensured that the Druidic order retained control over both perception and interpretation, reinforcing obedience and minimizing challenges to authority. The order's reach also depended on strategic placement within communities. Senior Druids often acted as advisors to chieftains, military leaders, and influential families, their counsel framed as sacred insight. By blending spiritual authority with practical guidance, they could influence decisions on governance, resource distribution, and alliances, ensuring outcomes aligned with Druidic objectives. The presence of a Druid in key decision-making moments created a perception that the natural and spiritual order were aligned, making resistance appear not only unwise, but sacrilegious. In this way, the Druids orchestrated compliance on a systemic level, guiding entire communities without the need for force or coercion. The psychological dimension of this influence was equally important. By cultivating reverence, fear, and loyalty simultaneously, the Druids ensured that their authority was internalized by those they guided. Rituals reinforced the notion that disobedience could provoke spiritual or social consequences, while observance of ceremonies provided rewards of status, protection, or perceived divine favor. Even minor infractions were interpreted through the lens of cosmic balance, creating a climate in which obedience was a matter of survival. The blending of faith, fear, and tradition created an enduring system of control, embedded in both the spiritual and social fabric of Celtic life. Over time, the order's hidden practices became self-reinforcing. As initiates progressed through the hierarchy, they absorbed the methods of influence and secrecy, ensuring that the next generation maintained the same structures of control. Communities came to perceive the Druids as indispensable mediators between the natural, spiritual, and political worlds, while the order quietly safeguarded its most disturbing practices from exposure. By embedding control at every level, individual, social, and political, the Druids created a legacy that was invisible to the uninitiated, yet pervasive in its effects, preparing the stage for the final revelations of their most extreme and boundary-crossing rituals. As we reach the culmination of the hidden practices of the ancient Druids, the full extent of their influence becomes undeniable. The ceremonies, psychological manipulations, and secret trials were not isolated events. They were part of a comprehensive system that allowed the Druids to shape beliefs, decisions, and even the social structure of entire tribes. At the highest level, the order had perfected the art of weaving fear, reverence, and obedience into a single enduring framework, ensuring that their authority would survive generations while remaining largely invisible to those outside the inner circle. The most disturbing aspect is that these rituals were designed to appear sacred and necessary, masking control as spiritual guidance and making the distinction between enlightenment and subjugation nearly impossible to discern. Even the most elite members of the community were subject to these hidden practices. Leaders, warriors, and influential families found themselves participating in ceremonies that tested faith, loyalty, and endurance, often without fully understanding the underlying rules. Every decision made in the presence of the Druids carried implicit consequences. Every action was observed and interpreted according to the secret code of the order. By embedding these practices in sacred traditions, the Druids ensured that obedience became instinctive, that devotion was intertwined with fear, and that the boundaries of acceptable behavior were dictated not by law, but by invisible spiritual authority. This system created a society in which the power of the unseen could rival, and even surpass, the power of kings and warriors. The extreme rituals, once reserved for the most significant moments of the calendar or for the most critical trials of initiation, served as both reinforcement and demonstration of control. Initiates learned through personal experience that failure to comply with the hidden codes could bring consequences that transcended physical punishment, affecting social standing, spiritual favor, and mental resilience. Every shadowed grove, every ceremonial fire, and every whispered chant was a lesson in obedience, an instruction in the subtle yet total reach of the Druidic hierarchy. The spiritual and psychological imprint left on participants was profound, often enduring for a lifetime and influencing the broader community by example. Now, as we reflect on the full scope of these practices, it becomes evident that the Druids' hidden rituals were not simply religious or symbolic. They were instruments of control that shaped the culture, decisions, and even the moral framework of entire Celtic societies. The line between guidance and domination was deliberately obscured, ensuring that the order maintained authority while projecting the image of spiritual wisdom. The result is a legacy that is both mesmerizing and deeply unsettling, demonstrating how belief, fear, and secrecy can intertwine to produce a system of extraordinary influence and enduring impact. If you've followed this journey into the shadowed world of the ancient Druids, now is the moment to engage. Leave a comment sharing your thoughts or reflections, perhaps a phrase like, "I never imagined this," or "This changes how I see ancient practices." Let us know you made it to the end. Like this video if it helped you uncover truths hidden in history, and check that you are subscribed to continue exploring these remarkable, often unsettling stories. There is a next layer of ancient mysteries waiting for you, and by staying connected, you ensure that no shadowed truth remains buried, continuing the exploration into the concealed legacies of the past.